الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So as we continue discussing the book Bulugh al-Maram, and we'll be covering today the chapter that he titles Kitab al-Buyu. So the overall chapter is titled Kitab al-Buyu, matter that relates to business transaction. Then discussing the second of those subtitles that you refer to, Bab al-Khiyar. So we have finished the first chapter of Kitab al-Buyu, the book of Buyu, and discussing the various chapters. So as for what we'll be covering today is a new sub-chapter, or that he referred to as Kitab or Bab Khiyar. Then he mentioned a few hadith. He mentioned 4 hadith in total in this chapter that covers regarding this particular topic. So we try to go through some of those hadith, 2 of those hadith today inshallah ta'ala, regarding what is said or mentioned regarding this discussion. So I'll read the hadith, and then we have the in Arabic, then we'll have the hadith read in English. Then we'll go through the ahkam that can be taken and extracted from these hadith. So after what is mentioned, and Abi Hurairah radiyallahu anhu قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من أقال مسلما بيعته أقاله الله أثرته رواه أبو داود وابن ماجه وصححه ابن حبان والحاكم عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إذا تبايع رجلان فكل واحد منهما بالخيار ما لم يتفرقا وكان جميعا أو يخير أحدهما الآخر فإن خير أحدهما الآخر فتبايع على ذلك فقد وجب البيع وإن تفرقا بعد أن تبايعا فلم يترك واحد منهما البيع فقد وجبت البيع متفق عليه واللفظ للمسلم. So these are the 2 hadith that is mentioned by the author rahimahullah Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani in his book Bulugh al-Maram. So we'll have the hadith read, and then we'll have the discussion surrounding these 2 hadith bi'awnillahi ta'ala. Tafaddal.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Hadith 691, narrated Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, whoever accepts back what he had sold to a Muslim, Allah will forgive his fault. Reported by Abu Dawood and Ibn Majah. Ibn Hibban and Al-Hakim graded it Sahih. Hadith 692, narrated Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhu. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, both parties in a business transaction have a right to annul the transaction so as long as they are not separated and remain together, or one of them gives the other the choice to conclude or annul the transaction. So if one of them gives the other the choice to conclude or annul the transaction, then they make the transaction accordingly. The transaction then becomes binding, or if they separate after having made the transaction and none of them has annulled it, then the transaction then becomes binding, agreed upon, and the wordings is Muslims.
So these are the 2 hadith that I mentioned by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah relating to this discussion, Bab Khiyar, yani Khiyar al-Majlis, that he mentioned these ahadith. So starting with the hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu, then he mentioned second the hadith of Ibn Umar. So we'll go to the hadith by way of first discussing the first hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu by discussing takhrij of the hadith. Then also the same will follow the hadith of Ibn Umar, and then we'll go to discussing the ahkam that can be taken from the hadith. So what is mentioned here regarding these 2 hadiths, the first hadith that is mentioned by the author rahimahullah in his book Bulugh al-Maram, that when he states this hadith, then we'll find concerning what is said to be takhrij of the hadith by Sheikh Zuhairi, that he mentioned that this first hadith that would be number 1, he mentioned Sahih, so the hadith is authentic. Rawahu Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, Ibn Hibban, wal Hakim, wazada Ibn Majah wal Ibn Hibban, Yawm al-Qiyamah. So meaning concerning the hadith here that has been mentioned, that the hadith is collected by Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, Ibn Hibban, wal Hakim, of all narrated this hadith, that he mentioned wazada Ibn Majah wa Ibn Hibban. So in the narration of this hadith of Ibn Majah and also the narration that is mentioned by Ibn Hibban by those two sources, there's an additional wording which is at the end of the hadith it did have Yawm al-Qiyamah. So they mention the end concerning Aqalah Allah Athratuhu Yawm al-Qiyamah. So as the hadith, that narration is found in Ibn Majah and also in Ibn Hibban. As for the others, Abu Dawood, that they do not include this particular additional wording of Yawm al-Qiyamah. They do not include additional wording of Yawm al-Qiyamah. Then he mentioned hadith authentic. Then also he mentioned the second hadith, that hadith of Ibn Omar radiallahu anhuma, where he mentioned the hadith muttafaqun alayh. Wallaf lil Muslim, the hadith of Ibn Omar, that the hadith, it is agreed between Bukhari and Muslim upon Ibn Omar, and the wording that is mentioned here is the wording of Imam Muslim, not the wording of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. So here the author, the muhakkik hafidullah, that he mentioned number 3, Sahih, Rawahu Bukhari, Muslim. So he mentioned hadith in the Bukhari and Muslim, and he stopped at there. Then he mentioned Tambi, that will cover also next. Then as for others who have made takhrij of this hadith, of those who have checked the book of Imam Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, when this hadith is stated, the hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu, that he mentioned in the Sheikh Mahir al-Fahl, when he made takhrij of the hadith, he mentioned the hadith Sahih. He said also the hadith is authentic. And he mentioned Akhrajahu, the hadith is found, collected by Ahmad in his Musnad, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, Tahawi fi Shar Mushkil, Ibn Hibban, Tabarani fi Makarim Akhlaq, Al-Hakim, Abu Na'im fi Al-Hilya, Wal Qudai fi Musnad Shihab, Wal Bayhaqi. Then he mentioned جاء هذا حديث في نهاية الباب السابق في نسخة ميم وغين. So also he mentioned regarding concerning takhrij of the hadith, that this hadith, it is found in Ahmed in his Musnad, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah. Also he added Tahawi in his book Mushkil, Shar al-Mushkil al-Athar. Then also he mentioned Ibn Hibban, Tabarani, and Tabarani have many books, and of the books that Tabarani rahimah have, he has a book regarding akhlaq, which is a book that is dedicated to mention narration hadith regarding the akhlaq of the Muslim I mentioned. And he has 2 books, Makarim al-Akhlaq, regarding good, outstanding behavior and conduct. Then you have Masawi al-Akhlaq, and a book regarding that is specifically mentioned bad conduct and behavior. So he mentioned that this hadith is mentioned. So the muhakkik, he stated that hadith here is in Tabarani's Makarim al-Akhlaq. Then he mentioned Al-Hakim in the Mustadrak, Abu Na'im in Al-Hilya, Bukhari in his book Musnad al-Shihab, also that book is in print, and Bayhaqi. So these are the sources according to Sheikh Mahir in his Tahqiq, that this hadith can be found regarding the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. So also he made a tambi regarding that regarding the hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu, that state man aqala Muslim bi'atuhu aqalahu Allah athratahu, of this hadith of Abu Hurairah, that in some of the prints or some of the makhtut, the manuscript of this book, that and also some prints, that the hadith of Abu Hurairah, it is mentioned as the last hadith of the previous chapter. So this hadith of Abu Hurairah, in some prints and in some manuscript, it is mentioned as the last hadith of the previous chapter, which the previous chapter he mentioned that matters regarding ahkam that relates to shurut al-buyu wa ma nuhiya anhu minhu, and things that are forbidden in certain transaction. So some of the ulama or some narration, this hadith of Abu Hurairah, it is mentioned alongside, included in those hadith. And in that chapter, the previous chapter, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he mentioned over 45 hadith. So in the previous chapter regarding shurutul bay, wa ma nuhiya anhu, and those that are forbidden in business transaction, he mentioned over 45 hadith. And if you were to include this hadith of Abu Hurairah, it will be the 46th hadith. So some have it as the previous chapter, and some they place it in the chapter which is the second chapter, which is Kitab al-Khiyar. So that's concerning some difference between in some of the prints of this book, with in relation to this hadith. Is it to go in the previous chapter, or it goes in the new chapter, which is al-Khiyar? So as for the second hadith, he mentioned muttafaqun alayh, that he mentioned hadith in a Bukhari and Muslim, as what is mentioned by Sheikh Mahir, that he mentioned Sahih, that also this hadith is then أخرجه Ahmad in his Musnad, Al-Bukhari fi Sahih, or Jami al-Sahih, Al-Musnad in his Sahih, Ibn Majah, Nasa'i, Ibn Jarud, Tahawi fi Shar, Al-Mushkil, Ibn Hibban, wal-Bayhaqi. So this hadith also, many of the ulama have mentioned this hadith, which is the hadith of Ibn Umar regarding إذا تبايع الرجل, if two persons was to form a business transaction. So they mention this hadith in the Bukhari, Muslim, Ahmad, also Ibn Majah, Nasa'i, Ibn Jarud, Tahawi, as in his book Shar al-Mushkil, also Ibn Hibban wal Bayhaqi. So this hadith, so both those two hadiths are mentioned. That also this hadith, that you'll find that the first hadith, Abu Hurairah anhu, where you find that even Sheikh Bassam in his explanation, Tawdil al-Ahkam, that he mentioned that other the ulama who have authenticated this hadith, he mentioned قال قشيري هو على شرطهما, that is hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu, that it is according to the condition of Bukhari and Muslim, according to what he mentions here. That he mentioned also Sahahu, also of the ulama who authenticated this hadith of Abu Hurairah. He mentioned Ibn Hazm, Al-Zahiri, Ibn Hibban, Al-Hakim. Then he mentioned Wafaqahu Al-Dhahabi, that Al-Dhahabi is in agreement with him. Wasahahu Al-Mundhiri, also Al-Mundhiri, Mundhir rahimullah, he has a summary of Abu Dawud and also some taliq. So Al-Mundhiri rahimahullah, he authenticated hadith, and also he mentioned Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, Ibn Daqiq al-Eid. Then also of contemporaries, Sheikh Albani rahimahullah, and also Sheikh Shuaib Arnaud in his tahqiq or is checking of Sunan Abu Dawud. So those are of those who have looked at the hadith and have graded the hadith accordingly. So as for now, the discussion regarding, so that's concerning takhrij. So as for the first hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu, we have spoke about him before regarding that his name, Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhr al-Dawsi, and some of the ulama mentioned Abdullah. So you have a khilaf between ulama, but the more renowned of the position regarding his name is Abdul Rahman. But of those who mention other names, but Abu Hurairah anhu is more renowned regarding his kunya, more so that of his name. Then as for the hadith, just some points regarding the hadith, that they have mentioned that what is stated here, Man aqala Allah, or ma qala al-Musliman, bayatuhu, that the word bayatuhu is not per se mentioned in the books of hadith. So bayatuhu, it is not mentioned like in Abu Dawud, nor in Ibn Majah. So this particular wording, it is not found actually in the books of hadith. So in the original books of Abu Dawud, that you will not find this particular wording. Also, they mention of in some of the narration of this hadith, of those Ibn Hibban and also Ibn Majah, when they narrated the hadith, also they have an additional wording which is Yawm al-Qiyamah, as we have stated. Man aqala musliman aqalahu Allah athratuhu Yawm al-Qiyamah. So at the end, there's a wording which is mentioned by some, which is Yawm al-Qiyamah. So this matter regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with aqalahu Allah, it will occur Yawm al-Qiyamah, according to those narrations. So as for this particular hadith, that Shaykh Abdullah ibn Fawzan, Abdullah al-Fawzan, Hafidullah ta'ala, in his explanation of this of Bulugh Maram, then he kind of somewhat went through now the next step regarding explaining some of the wordings. So I've done the takhrij al hadith, so both hadith are authentic. Now regarding takhrij, or concerning takhrij of hadith in a very simplified, basic way. So that's concerning takhrij of hadith in a very basic, simplified manner. As for the second matter regarding this hadith, or these hadith, they mention, first hadith I will discuss the hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu, where they mention man aqala musliman. So they discuss concerning the word aqala. What is the word? What does this mean regarding this work? Aqala, they said that ulama have mentioned lugatan, linguistically mean raf wal izala. It means to remove something, or izala, to end of something, or to undo of something. So that's the general meaning linguistically. Aqal, rafa. أو إزالة. So that's concerning that word. What I mentioned, أقاله الله, meaning concerning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive this person. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remove from him his shortcomings and his errors, and his so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward this person who performed this act by also removing of the person's shortcomings and sins. Istilahan, the word iqala in al-fiqh al-islamiyya, or in the books of the fuqaha, they mention iqala. Sheikh Fawzan mentioned rafa al-aqd wa ilgha hukmu, or a person that to annul, so to annul a transaction agreement and to remove the ruling, not to act upon the ruling, so to undo an agreement, to annul an agreement, and also with the agreement of both parties. So this is with the agreement of both parties. So that's concerning which is iqala, which is the Muslim annulling of that contract or undoing of that contract. So they mentioned Musliman, so that it mentioned, as it state, man aqala Musliman. As for the Shaykh mentioned, as for the word Musliman, that is mentioned, that it is mentioned, هذا خرج مخرج الغالب, meaning that the word Muslim is you, but this ruling is not restricted to the Muslim. But regarding concern that in most cases that it do occur between the Muslim, but also this ruling, it extends to non-Muslim. So this ruling is not specific to the Muslim, that you might find it may occur more commonly amongst the Muslim, but a more common practice amongst the Muslim, and are done between the Muslim, but also this ruling is allowed to be done with non-Muslim. So the word Muslim here doesn't mean that this ruling is restricted and specific between a Muslim, specific transaction or thing that is allowed between a Muslim, but rather it is something which is allowed also with non-Muslim. As Shaykh mentioned, هذا خرج مخرج الغالب لأن الثواب إقالة ثابت إقالة غير Muslim, that even the reward also would include that it applies also to non-Muslim. So the Muslim who may do this to a non-Muslim, then also the ruling it still applies. The ruling it still applies, and reward still stands. Then I mentioned فقد وردت in the Bazaar بلفظ من أقال نادما. So also an al-Bazaar in his narration he states من أقال نادما. So the person who does so, and does so out of remorse. The person who does so out of remorse, then that's the hadith. Then I mentioned athratuhu, as in hadith mentioned, where it mentioned the end of the hadith, that a person who does of this act, أقاله الله أثرته. So they mention أثرته, that what is meant by regarding zella wal khatiyya. What is meant by athra, meaning the person is error, is shortcomings. This is what is intended. That by way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I mention أقاله الله أثرته, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive him of his shortcomings and his errors. So the person who carry out this act of the reward in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward that person by forgiving that person of his sins, pardoning that person of his sins. So that's concerned. So the meaning of the hadith is that a person who was to do of this, act, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove of their sin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove of those sins. So anyone who return something and pardon that person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will also remove of their sin. So as for what now is discussed regarding this matter, that he mentioned, the third of the point that relates to the hadith, regarding concern this hadith is used by the fuqaha regarding to show the permissibility of this act of iqala. So al-iqala, that it shows the permissibility of this regarding one carrying out this act. And also it shows the virtue of this act. It shows the virtue of this act with a form of ihsan. There was a person that wished to return of the item, so a form of iqala of the person returning of that item. So the person may have bought something or have sold something, but I wish to return of that item. Then for the person to do so and return by the item, and also take back, and also they are given back the whatever they paid for the item, then it's something which is permissible. So this is something which is the rights of returning of an item. Then this is something which is permissible, as this hadith, it shows off this. So they mentioned that, so regarding from buyer, the buyer or the seller wish to return the item, then it is something which is said allowed. It's not something which is wajib, but it is something which is allowed. And I mentioned that min bab al-ihsan wal ma'ruf. So the person that people want to do of things of ihsan, of goodness, and doing things which is upright and things of good practice, then this is something which is allowed. This is something which is allowed. So I mentioned that a person at times, buyer or seller, may purchase or sell an item, may purchase an item, or may have sold an item, or have bought an item, but then soon after they wish to return that item, or they won't buy that item for reasons. Then also there's this is something which is allowed for the person can go back and try to return the item, but also they'll return whatever they have paid for the item. And vice versa. So there's something which is allowed to be done. So they mentioned something which is mubah. So as for the ruling regarding this practice of iqala, returning of an item by both sides, buyer or seller, it is something which is mubah, jaiz. It is something which is permissible and allowed to be done. Then we discuss concerning iqala, that Sheikh also highlighted that a discussion between the fuqaha regarding that iqala, the asl for it is by way of lafz. With a person, it is something is said, so it is done verbally. Where a person will verbally say something, akaltuka, such and such, that I return this item that they mentioned, that this is done verbally. But in today's time, that also by way of وَقَدْ يَكُونَ بِالْفِعْلِ, so something that can be done by way of the person's speech, verbally something is said, or by way of the person's actions, then both ways are jaiz, both ways or jaiz, where the person return the item, and also they'll also receive what they paid for the item. So they'll be compensated accordingly. The next matter discussed are the matter al-rabi', which is the fourth matter regarding this discussion, that the ulama, they discuss, is iqala a form of fasq or bay. So the person return and to do of this, is this considered to be something which is an act of the person annulling that act, so fasq, dissolving that transaction, or it is actually a new transaction, which is a bay. So we have a discussion between the ulama regarding this matter. So the ulama, they divide into two opinions on this matter. So there's two opinions on this matter as regarding is iqala a form of fasq, ending the transaction, or it's a new bay, it's a sale. So what is to find that the first view of the ulama, that they have come to the conclusion that it is annaha fasq, that iqala is a form of fasq, is a form of annulment of the transaction, wa ilgha lil act, and ending that transaction. So dissolving of that act, that of the ulama of this opinion, that is a form of fasq, which is dissolving of that act. And laysat bay, and it's not per se like a new transaction that is being carried out. So with them, it's a fasq, not a new transaction that is being carried out. And that's a narration. As for those of the ulama who more ascribe to this view, they mention riwayah and Ahmed. So Imam Ahmed rahimahullah, that is a riwayah that goes back to him, that is of this view. Also of the others of the Anabila, al-Khiraki, and al-Khiraki of the first wrote a muqtasar regarding fiqh and Hanabila. So the first muqtasar al-Khiraki, is the first muqtasar in the books of fiqh that relates to the madhab of the Hanabila. Also al-Qadi wa Aktharun, and many of and others. So others of the Hanabila who somewhat incline or take the position that is a form of fasq. The second opinion, you mentioned annaha bay'. The second opinion of the ulama on this matter is that is a form of bay', not a fasq. So the second opinion is a bay', is a new transaction that is taking place, where the person they are returning is like, and the person returning the item and receiving what they paid, then this is like a new transaction. So they mentioned that as for the ulama who have taken this position, there's another narration on Imam Ahmed, is the madhab of Imam al-Malik on this matter. So they mentioned that it's a bay, it's a new transaction, not a fasq. Asheka, so Allahu alam that it's fasq, bay, they differ on this matter. Allahu alam, it seems to be a fasq, not per se of a bay, and Allahu alam, Allah knows best regarding this matter. Al-Wajh al-Khamis, he mentioned as for the fifth point on this, so we'll end the point regarding it's the form of bay or naskh, annulment or a new transaction that they mention the next of those masail that relates to this discussion, اختلاف العلماء في حكم إقالة بأقل أو أكثر, meaning is it permissible for one in this return of the item and the person getting their repayment, their payment back, is it allowed for the person to receive more than what they initially paid or less than what they initially paid? So the person in return bought this book and he wished to return it. So I bought the book and I wish to return it to the seller, but am I allowed to take more for the book, more than what I paid initially, or less than what I paid initially? Is this allowed? So in this type of return of the item, so is the person allowed to take more or given less of the item that they are returning? Then there's a khilaf between the ulama on this matter. So they mention أنها لا تجوز إلا بثمن, that it is the first opinion of the ulama is that it is not allowed for a person to take more or less than what he initially paid. So the person is to take back and to be given what he initially paid. So whatever the cost of the item was, then that's what the person, the one is to receive back. They mentioned that and of the ulama, they said the narration of Ahmed called Naql an Ahmed ما دل على كراهية الزيادة, also narration of Ahmed al-Hanbal that it is dislike for the person to receive more. So the mention is not allowed to take more. Those who mentioned that a person should stick to only what he paid or what was given, not more nor less. But those who mentioned taking more is disliked, and those who mentioned that the person should not take less. One should not take less than what he initially had paid. But overall, that view, they come to conclude a person is to receive back what he gave, what he paid for the item, no more, no less. The second opinion, جواز إقالة بأقل أو أكثر. The second opinion that a person is allowed to take more or less, or given more or less. So the item being returned, then one can receive more or less than what he initially paid. This is the view that is taken by some of the ulama, and that's the view by Ahmed ibn Hanbal. So that's concerning of those who mentioned that of those who say it is allowed that the person shall not take more, they all that not is a form of fasq. So because a person shouldn't be get more or less, because it's a fasq annulment, is that dissolvement of the contract, so the person receive exactly what he paid. Those who say it's a bi', then a person can receive more or less. So those who say it's a bi' is a form of new transaction, then a person can receive more or less as they see it as a separate new transaction. So those are some of the aqwal that are mentioned regarding this particular discussion, that the first hadith that is mentioned. Then as we said, that a khilaf between of the different print of this book and the manuscript, whether this hadith that we just mentioned, is it a part of the previous chapter of Shurut al-Bay, or is it a part of the new, it's to be mentioned with the new chapter, which is Khiyar al-Majlis. So Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, he placed the hadith of, this hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu in the bab of Khiyar al-Majlis. So as for the next hadith, the hadith of Ibn Omar, that now to be discussed. So before we go into that discussion, just to clarify regarding what the ulama mentioned, Khiyar al-Majlis. So Khiyar al-Majlis, that they mention al-khiyar al-majlis, that khiyar, it means al-istifa. So consider a person has not a choice. So the person have a choice. So the person having a choice in a matter where the person can either do this way or do thing that way. So the person have a choice in doing this way or going that way. So that's concerning the meaning linguistically. So ikhtiyar means ikhtar ma shit. The person can choose as he wishes. So al-khiyar, where the person is allowed to choose what he wishes, or he is able to choose between the choices that he has. So the person is able to choose between the different choices that is put in front of him or her. As for khiyar istilahan, as all the fuqaha, they defined khiyar al-majlis. They mentioned wa talabat al-khir amrain, that a person tried to choose that what is the more suitable of the choices. Imma imda al-bay, of the choices that a person has, either he follow through and conclude on the transaction, so to conclude and to go through on that transaction, to finalize the transaction and take it, or al-fasq, or he can dissolve the transaction and not go through on it. So al-khiyar al-majlis, or khiyar, where a person in that transaction, he has a choice of either to go through and to conclude that transaction and finalize it and accept it, or he can not go through on the transaction. He at some point can pull out of the transaction. So that's concerning what is meant by al-khiyar. So khiyar, we said khiyar al-majlis, as we'll discuss. So that's concerning what is meant by khiyar amongst the fuqaha in the books of buyu, in the bab of al-buyu. So they mentioned the hadith of Ibn Umar anhuma, where the Prophet of Islam mentioned the hadith, إِذَا تَبَايَعْ رَجُلَانِ, that if two men forms a contract or go into a business transaction, and the hadith was read, so either that they have a choice to conclude the matter or not to conclude the matter, to dissolve the matter, but they have a certain, they mention فَكُلُّ وَاحِدْ مِنْهُمَا بِالْخِيَارِ, that both of them have the option to either carry through and conclude on the transaction that they started, to conclude it, to finalize it, make a decision and to finalize it, or they can not. They can choose not to continue the transaction. I mentioned, and when is this? Ma lam yatafarraq. Ma lam yatafarraqa, until they have not separated. Wakana jami'an, and then they're together. So that's concerning this discussion. So at what point are they allowed to finalize the transaction? What point, up to what point they are allowed to finalize the transaction? So again, we're going to concern this hadith. It mentioned muttafaqun alayh, the hadith of Ibn Umar anhuma, and we have discussed about Ibn Umar with Abdullah ibn Umar ibn Khattab anhu. So the hadith in the Bukhari wa Muslim and others. The hadith in the Bukhari wa Muslim and others, as we have stated before in the takhrij of the takhrij of the hadith in some basic form, that I mention Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, wal lafdhu lil Muslim, that this wording laf, meaning the wording of this hadith, is the word that is taken from Imam Muslim narration, not of that of Imam Bukhari. So this narration is the narration of Imam Muslim, not the narration of Imam al-Bukhari. As for the hadith, it means concerning that that two persons have gone into a transaction, that one or both, that they can pull out of the transaction or continue the transaction as long as they are together and haven't been separated, where they have a choice of either they can go through or not, go through the transaction or not. And if they choose to go through the transaction, both, then that's agreed upon after. So that's concerning what hadith mentioned in brief. So the Shaykh mentioned that two persons, the hadith mentioned إذا تبايع رجلان. The Shaykh mentioned, Shaykh Abdullah Fawzan, that even that he mentioned rajulan, so it's not specific to male. So this case is not only applicable or applied only to male, but also the same ruling applies to female. So whatever applies to male applies to female regarding any two persons who go into a business transaction, regardless of their gender of male or female. وَكُلُّ وَاحِدٍ مِنْهُمَا بِالْخِيَارِ, that each of them have a right to either conclude or to not go through under the transaction. I mentioned that referred to as khiyar al-majlis. Is referred to in ulama khiyar al-majlis. So the time where you are allowed to reconsider whether you want to go through or not. You want to continue the transaction or to conclude it or not to. So khiyar al-majlis. Then I mentioned ma lam yatafarraqa, meaning concerned to know that they have not separated. As long as they have not separated, that it stands. وَإِنْ كَانَ جَمِيعًا, and if they are still together, meaning that they are still together, they can still discuss the matter and still have a choice as to whether to continue or not. أو يخير أحدهما الآخر, or one may choose not to want to go through with the transaction. One decide not to, then that's his choice, and that he has a right to make that choice. But if what they choose to go through, then both have to abide by this. If both decide to go through, then both must abide by this. Or if they conclude that they wish to give some time to reconsider, then also that stands. So discuss concerning that, the discussion regarding concerning that both have this right to still consider what I mentioned. They haven't separated, they mentioned bil abdan. So the separation by they're still together, physically together, and have not separated. So both are physically together. Then they mentioned that they have the right to still decide. They have a right to still decide as long as they have not separated physically. They mentioned regarding concerning that so long the matters haven't ended and they haven't separated from each other, that they have a right to of choice on the matter. They mentioned Ibn Mundhir rahimahullah قال هذا معنى and Sufyan al-Thawri, that's a video taken by Sufyan al-Thawri, Awzahi, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Shafi wa Ishaq. So the ulama mentioned that yes, they have this right as long as they are both together. Regarding concerning that also they mentioned that each also, if they choose to conclude, that they'll give each other some time in the future to make a decision. So they won't make a decision instantly at this moment, but what they decide that will give you some time for both sides to decide on the matter. Then that also is allowed. So if they both decide on this matter, also they mention this is allowed. So that's concerning that what is mentioned regarding this hadith. Then I mention of the points of this hadith. One, hadithun or hadith dalil ala ithbat khiyar al-majlis, that this hadith is of those proof, the evidence that is used by the ulama or some of the ulama regarding that it shows the permissibility and affirm that this is something which is valid. So this shows that this act of the buyer and selling of a choice to look at the matter and to discuss the matter. Then I mention khiyar al-majlis, that they allow this up. So this is something which is allowed for both buyer and the seller. So both buyer and seller, they have a time for them to consider the matter. This is something which is allowed for both buyer and seller, which is they can either conclude or they can not go through with the transaction. So they mentioned that khiyar al-majlis is something that of the goodness of the Sharia and the hikmah of the Sharia, where it gives some permissibility for both buyer and seller of those who are involved in the transaction for some time for them to, maybe at times, to reconsider and to look into the matter and then come to a decision. So not to be hasty, but give them some leeway for them to maybe to rethink the matter if they want to, or for them to go through if they want to, but give them a leeway for them to reconsider and to maybe look into the matter further if they choose so. Then discuss this hadith, what's the dabit regarding a tafriq, between both being separated, the tafarraqa, out then we give some dabit. So what's the guidelines to say when the majlis have ended, when things have come to an end. So regarding concern that regarding a tafriq, when they are separated, that a lengthy discussion between the ulama, but of the ulama who mentioned that overall it goes back to urf. So it's concerned that there's nothing specifically mentioned in the hadith regarding what is said to be when they separate. So it goes back to the more standard custom of the people. So that the standard is that is followed in the custom of the people, then that is what is followed. That is what is followed. So so it could be in the form of the practice of the people when the business ones are said to be have ended, where both are committed, where if they walk away, they were having a discussion, they agree upon something, then they walk away. So that shows the ending of that discussion, because now they have walked away and they have turned their backs on each other and have gone. I mentioned tafarraqa, lam yatafarraqa, they haven't turned their backs on each other and have gone away and moved away. Or the person, then he jump on a bus or or in his car or his mode of transport and have left the scene. So the person just walking away, or even leaving that scene, or he's in a distance where you cannot see him, or he's so they have all that discussion regarding what will constitute that they have now separated. So the fact that they're still together, then the discussion still is there, but at what point it is considered to be now finalized when they now separate. When is this? So they mentioned this go back to urf. At times it could be when, according to the urf, the custom, the standard custom of the people regarding these matters, when they walk away, they are gone from each other. Or in today's time, that they are still on the phone, when at what point is considered on the phone call that you're still in the discussion regarding the transaction. So when you hang up the call, or the person to call you back a few minutes after, is that also acceptable? If you're on the computer, is it when the person then sign out or they end that call with that person online? So it goes back to the custom of the people as to when it is considered. Or you find in certain business that they give you a certain time period in certain business that you have a certain amount of days that you can return the item with a form of, you have a khiyar. So you have also that time, you have a choice to return the item. So different. So it goes back to the custom that is set of the people of that time. So it's not something which is fixed. That may vary from one country to another, from one custom to another, from one time to another. So those things, it goes back to the custom that become the thing, to the measuring stick. The measuring stick become the customs of the people regarding this matter. Then I mention Ithbat Khiyar al-Majlis, regarding the matter regarding affirming, to the hadith affirm this, as for the aqwal of the ulama, that jumhur of the ulama that affirm and take the position, it is something, Khiyar al-Majlis, the person of our choice, to consider that this something, it is allowed, and that's the position taken by jumhur of the ulama amongst the sahaba, the tabi'een, and a'imma. So most of the ulama and the madhahib, that they are of the opinion that khiyar al-majlis, it is something which is allowed based upon the hadith, and also of the ulama of the Zahiriyah, wa Ibn Habib, of the Ibn Abdul Bar of the Malikiyah, that they of the opinion that this is something which is allowed based upon the hadith that has been mentioned of Ibn Umar, that state this clearly. Then you find a second opinion. So the first opinion, they affirm that this is something which is allowed. The second opinion is the opinion taken by Imam Abu Hanifa wa Imam Malik rahimullah, and akthar of those madhaib of the Hanafiya and the Malikiyah, that they all that is of their companions, that it is something Adam Thubut Khiyar al-Majlis. They do not all that this is something which is allowed. They do not per se acknowledge this. So the Hanafiya or Imam Abu Hanifa and also Imam Malik and their companions, they do not affirm or consider this something which is allowed. So for them, the contract, it ends when that's it. When a contract is made at that point, khalas is ended. So whatever, so it ends. So in the majlis, when they conclude, then that's it. As for anything else that happens after, it doesn't account for much for them. So that's concerning, and this is by the person by way of words or by action, if it occurs, unless there's a valid reason to annul that contract, then they said that contract, it stands. And there's no khiyar al-majlis. You don't have a time to reconsider, then for them that does not stand. That does not stand. And they mention of their dalil that they mentioned regarding Allah subhanahu statement, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu awfu bil uqud. So they mention awfu bil uqud. So they mention and fulfill your covenants and your agreements. So they said, if you have made the agreement, then you cannot go back on it. According to them, but said the hadith, that ayah is that they're using regarding that matter, and also that it applies the Muslim, yes, should stand by their agreements, as in the hadith of the Prophet they use also al-Muslimun ala shurutihim, and the hadith in the At-Tirmidhi and others. I mentioned the Prophet said al-Muslimun, that the Muslim, that they should uphold their agreements. Al-Muslimun ala shurutihim, the Muslim should stand by their agreements. So they mention that these are sources that show that a Muslim, if you have come to a conclusion regarding that transaction, then he cannot relook at that matter or revisit that matter or return or have a second opinion. He must accept it. But they mention qawl awwal, they refute that the second opinion I mentioned, what you're using are general texts, but what we have is something which is specific. So you're using general that is very general, but that we acknowledge. But in this case, khiyar al-majlis is mentioned in a specific case as an exception to accept regarding something which is allowed. It is something which is allowed. So we have a specific text that give allowance to this, though general text is not giving precedent over the specific text, which is the hadith that have been mentioned. So you find with this concern the ulama that because of the Malikiyah and the Ahnaf have taken the position, some of the ulama, they're very stern against that view, based upon you have the specific text. So you find that Ibn Abdul Barr rahimahullah, who's of the Malikiyah, but also I've mentioned regarding فَقَدْ أَكْثَرْ الْمُتَأَخِّرُونَ مِنَ الْمَالِكِيَّةِ وَالْحَنَفِيَّةِ مِنْ احتجاج بمذهبهما في رد هذا حديث بما يطول ذكره. So you mentioned that the Ahnaf and the Malikiyah are the Muta'akhirin, that they have somewhat gone against that hadith, and they tried and he said, no, as for that discussion, a very lengthy discussion, that is somewhat to unravel their position. And by this you find that they come under some type of so you find that ulama somewhat go against that have rebuked them for this, some form of condemnation and rebuke for this in a stern way. So that's concerning. So overall, regarding the text is specific, and the hadith in the Bukhari and Muslim regarding the permissibility of khiyar al-majlis. So any view that is being put forward then doesn't stand based upon that specific hadith. Even I mentioned Imam Malik rahimullah that in his book Al-Muwatta, that he have mentioned this hadith, but then he mentioned kind of somewhat he goes against this hadith, even though it is mentioned in his book Al-Muwatta. So it's not that he is ignorant of the hadith or doesn't know of the existence of the hadith. He knows of the existence of the hadith, but for reason he took a different stand. He took a different stand. And at that time, that mentions Amr al-Medina, the people of Medina per se didn't have this approach. So, and Abdullah mentioned of the ulama of Medina who did have that approach. So after that, as Ibn Abdul Barr rahimahullah mentioned, is a lengthy discussion on that matter. But the overall, in summary, the overall opinion is that of the ulama, which is majority, who yuthbitun, that they confirm and acknowledge khiyar al-majlis based upon the hadith. We find the Malikiyah and the Ahnaf does not, but they use general texts, but it cannot be the general text that there cannot be given precedent over specific texts. Wajh al-Khamis, they mention of the other thing that he mentioned, that a general benefit of the hadith. So he mentioned regarding concern is that this khiyar al-majlis, it is something that the hadith, it shows regarding the permissibility that is allowed for both the buyer and the seller. Nam, that for either they can they can revisit the matter within a reasonable practice standard and agree upon the transaction or the agreement, or they can pull out, So they refer to the khiyar al-majlis. Accordingly, I will mention that mudda, those things are set by customs as to that time frame or when to decide this, when this conclusion is made. So that's concerning that matter. So if they come to an agreement, then they should stand by it. So whatever agreement they come to, then they should all honor and stand by the agreement. So if there's a transaction, then both are to honor that contract, that decision, and uphold each other's end of the bargain. So with that, inshallah ta'ala, then with this hadith, we'll end this discussion regarding of the hadith that discussed khiyar al-majlis and the permissibility of this. And in this discussion also of those hadith that the author rahimahullah mentioned regarding this discussion, will continue regarding kitab al-buyu', and in particular khiyar, where Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he mentioned 4 hadith or 3, depending on which way one look at the first hadith, but overall mention a few hadith regarding this matter. So we'll cover these hadith in the remaining hadith in the next session. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخرة والحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وأستغفرك وأتوب إليك وبالله تعالى توفيق. How long was that one? Okay.